Yeah? Hi, this is Nancy with On Point TV. This is our very first YouTube live. We have for some time been doing some Facebook lives, and sure enough, I was on YouTube the other day and saw this little button that said live, and I'm like, really? We can do YouTube live? Seriously, who knew? So Teresa is running camera. Everybody say hi, Teresa. Hi, Teresa. She waved at us. And we're trying our first YouTube live. So I hope that you enjoy the channel. I hope you've been following along with the different things that I've been teaching you in quilting. And today I decided to teach you a couple of techniques for putting down the binding by machine. Now, I want to tell you that for me personally, I think that when I am making my very best quilts, I am stitching the binding down by hand. But there's a lot of different occasions when maybe a machine binding just might be a better idea. One is, people tell me all the time, I can't do it by hand. I have arthritis. I can't, but I don't want to not be making my quilts. So I want you to be finishing your own quilts. And to do that, you have to put a binding on. Now, whether or not you do it by hand or by machine, that is going to be a decision that you will have to make. All right. So I first want to show you down here how I normally do it by hand. So when I say by machine or by hand, the stitching on the binding the first time, you always do by machine. Well, at least as far as I know, you always do it by machine. And I want you to see, can you see this little bit of leftover batting? When I do my hand stitched bindings, I cut my batting to be about 1/8 of an inch bigger than the actual quilt and binding. That's so that the binding ends up full. So let me show you what I mean by that. Come around here. I've got this going on. I'm using my clips here to hold it in place. And when I get to where, oops, yeah, it's all the way over here, okay. When it gets to where I'm doing the stitching, this is the line of machine stitching. When I bring this over, it makes a little fold in that batting, that extra batting. So then my binding is full, and I love that. And when I'm doing it by hand, back here a little bit is my needle. When I'm stitching this by hand, I am taking little stitches about that big and stitching the whole thing by hand. I love that. I personally love it. I love the look of it. I love the process of it. I love everything about doing them by hand. But there are some times that you want to do it by machine. So let me put this one out of the way. And I want to show you a couple of examples of what I'm going to show you today. So this technique here is a binding by machine. And do you see this really glitzy red thread? When I am doing one of the 3 techniques I'm going to show you today, when I'm doing this, I put a heavyweight metallic thread in the bobbin. And that gives me that little bead of that metallic thread going through the, on the quilt. Love that. I don't know how I came up with that myself. As far as I know, I came up with that myself. So that's one technique I'm going to show you. This is a quilt that I made. This is a Nancy Rink design. This is called Getting to Know You. And on this quilt, she instructed us to do the binding with Susan Cleveland's Piping Hot binding. Now this looks really, really cool. And I absolutely positively love this. Now let me show you Susan's book and stuff. So this is Susan's book, Piping Hot binding. You use this kind of, this cording, I don't know, it's maybe an 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch cording, which again you can get from Susan, and then she has this cool little tool. Now I am not going to show you how to do this today, because honest to Pete, Susan has the coolest, best video on how to do her own technique. So if you're interested in learning Susan's Piping Hot binding, go to Susan Cleveland, let me see, I'll find you the website here a second. piecesbewithyou.com. piecesbewithyou.com. That's Susan Cleveland. You should have no problem finding it. But love the look of this. But in Susan's technique, she actually does the end process by machine. And I don't like that. So I love the look on the front, but when it came to what happened on the back of this quilt, I stitched this by hand like I normally do. So I used Susan's technique for putting the piping here, but when it came to the back stitching, I actually did that by hand with my normal hand stitching for a binding. Now, that brings me to something fun that just happened. So last week I was in Kalamazoo at the Log Cabin Quilters, and I was doing a demo for them, and hello everybody from Kalamazoo, I hope you guys are all watching. And they had just had somebody drop off two excuse me, old quilts. Now I'm not going to call it an antique because I don't know, it's got to be like 100 years to be considered an antique or something like that. But this was so cool. And so they asked if I wanted the quilts, because they knew that in the teaching that I do, that I would show these quilts. And the lady that gave it to them just did not want those quilts sitting in some, box somewhere. She wanted them seen. I'm your girl. If you got an antique quilt that you don't have a home for and you want to be sure people see it, look at this. Less than a week later, this quilt is the star of the show. I was totally blown away. Look at this old quilt with a little piping. Now, I don't think that there's a pipe inside that, so I think that we maybe might call that a flange, but look at that. I was totally blown away that a quilt this old. The reason I'm not sure how old it is because it is stitched by machine, but as you can see by these blocks here, this is a very well-loved quilt. Now, the other reason that I wanted to bring this quilt home is, you see this block? Now I want to show you this block. Let me see if I can get a good one here. This is an old quilt I've had for ages and ages and ages. Why would Nancy buy an old quilt top that, look at this. This thing's just got holes all over the place. But this quilt block is called a Seven Sisters quilt block. I am one of 7 sisters. There are 10 kids in my family. I have 3 brothers and 6 sisters. So I am one of 7 sisters. So I kind of love any of these quilts that are 7 sisters quilts. And this quilt is a 7 sisters, but it doesn't have the star in the middle. So it only has 6. So that's one reason I wanted it. The second reason I wanted it was to be able to show you that these old quilts, this isn't nothing new. Susan Cleveland didn't come up with this idea. Ricky Timms didn't come up with this idea, because this quilt is definitely older than either one of those. So I just want you to see that, these are really cool techniques, and they're tried and true techniques that they've been doing for a long time. So now I want to take you over to my ironing board, and we are going to start the process of these by machine. So, all right, so Teresa needs to scooch over here, and there's a kitty on the ground there. Okay, can you see the kitty? Everybody say, hi, Ryder Cup, how are you? Ryder Cup says, I am just fine. I love to be the star of the show. All right, so we're going to my ironing board. This is one of those times that having this big ironing board like this is absolutely fabulous. What I want to show you here is that these next steps are the steps that I use for all machine bindings. So this is one that I've done. And let's move these out of the way here a second. So the first thing I do after I get my binding, so the initial part is sewed by machine like normal, nothing different there, all right? Sewed by machine. But when it comes time for the trimming, for a machine binding, I trim it right next to the quilt. So when I do it by hand, I leave that extra 1/8 of an inch. When I do it by machine, no matter which of these 3 techniques you choose, I trim it right next to the quilt. Then you take it to your ironing board, and you want to press the binding. So you're going to take and just pull it so that the binding is pressed away from the quilt. And I've got to do that on the green one too. But for this technique, for this quilt, I'm going to show you how people do it where it's by machine and they stitch from the front. All right. So to stitch from the front, this is one of the tools you're going to need. The light Stema Seam 2 that is 1/4 of an inch wide. So here it is. It's on a roll and it's only 1/4 of an inch wide. Now some people do this next step with glue. I know one person that does it with Elmer's glue, bless her heart. So I'm going to take this. Oops, I see a little bit. It's scritching out a little bit farther than I want it. There. I'm going to take the Stema Seam and I'm going to put it down so that it's right at the edge of the quilt. All right, so I told you that I sew my binding on normal, which means that I'm going to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I trim it down. So for this, I know that I can just put it right next to the edge of the quilt and it will be in place. Cut it off. I love this steam-a-seam too because of course it's going to kind of hold in place for a little bit. Then you're going to take your iron and quickly press that. You don't want to over press that, just really quick with it. And then you got to cool it down a little bit. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you're going to pull off the paper. And when you're pulling off the paper, pull it nice and slow, just in case there's a part that did not stick. Okay. Now I have an adhesive on that edge. So now I can go to the edge of the quilt and fold this over. And because this one, I'm going to stitch down from the top side, I need this to stay in place. I cannot risk that it's going to flip up. So I'm going to hold it there and I'm going to grab my iron. Teresa and I planned some of this, but some of these little things maybe not so much. So please excuse my arms and things like that as we're recording. And I'm going to press that. I'm not going to continue that, but I think you'll get the idea. So that when I go to the sewing machine, I'm going to sew this from the top side. So now we're going to go to the next quilt and prep it. That I'll do in a different technique. So for this next technique, I won't use the steam-a-seam. This is one. These little quilts, these are baby quilts. The West Michigan Quilters Guild, which is the guild that I belong to, we make quilts for the neonatal center at Spectrum Neonatal. So, I don't know, 3,000, 4,000 babies come through the NICU unit at Spectrum in Grand Rapids. Every one of those babies gets a baby quilt from the West Michigan Quilters Guild. So that's a little plug for the West Michigan Quilters Guild. So on this one, again, I want to trim the quilt down so that it is even with the binding. So not like I normally do it by hand where I leave a little bit extra. I want to have it cut all the way off. Oh, and my bindings are cut 2 1/4 inches. I should have mentioned that earlier because I know somebody will ask. And then here on the corner, I'm going to take just the quilt, cut the corner off the quilt, not the binding, just the quilt. And then just like with the other one, I'm going to take and press this up. And this just kind of helps keep it all lined up nice and straight. When I'm doing a hand binding, I don't do this because you don't need to do this. With a hand binding, it is going to, you're going to turn it as you go. Okay. So I'm going to do this one corner because we will want to stitch at least one corner. RC Kitty Cat is now right around Teresa's feet. So if all of a sudden the camera goes flying, you'll know that it's because RC Kitty Cat decided he wanted to be on camera. Nice and flat there. And then the corner itself, I'm going to turn it. Now on this one, I on purpose stitched this binding down with a dark thread in the bobbin so that you can see that when I bring this over, it's going to go past the blue thread, which means I will be stitching on the quilt, which will make more sense in a second. Now I'm going to take this corner. I am going to pre-press this corner. It just makes it a little bit easier when you're on machine. Don't burn yourself. Okay. All right, so that'll be the second sample that I do. And then the third one is a quilt I was working on yesterday. If any of you are on our Facebook page, you maybe saw this quilt. Can you see that? So what's cool about it is it's called Applique Elements is the company. So Applique spelled the normal way, but Elements ends in a Z. And they create pre-cut out fusible pieces, so designs. And what's super cool is that those designs, I'm not sure it's on steam-a-seam too, but it sure does feel like it's on steam-a-seam too. So I literally bought that pack on Friday, and yesterday, within 2 hours, I had the whole top done. And then I did the Applique quilting, so I just put it all onto the base and then fused it all down. Then did the quilting. So my quilting goes right here along the edges. There's a video that we've done on Applique quilting. Now, one thing I do want to point out, come on up here to the flowers. So I loved using like a busy background like this, and the flowers look great, but they don't stand out from the background. So when I got the bike done and it was just kind of not standing out, I took my black Pigma pen, and can you see here? I did an outline with the pen all the way around it. My friend Marilyn had actually done a quilt of applique where it wasn't standing out. She did stitching all around the edge of every single applique to get this look, and honestly, I just wasn't going to do that. So I took my black Pigma pen and I just drew right along the edges there, and I think that made the quilt stand out a little bit more. So for this one, we're going to take, first we're going to trim the quilt down. And on this one I had, because it's a wall hanging, I had actually drawn the lines as to where the quilt, the binding would go, instead of having it just be the edge of the quilt. So I wanted to make sure everything was very, very square. Get to my corner, cut that little corner off like I always do, and then come down here. So right to the edges there, and then I'm going to press. Now, I've tried this a couple of different ways. Should I fuse it or should I not fuse it? I think I'm not going to fuse it. So half of this is done fused, half of this is not fused, and together we will figure out which way works best for me. Okay. This is the one that I'm going to use that heavyweight metallic on. So, and I'll show you that when we get to the machine. Oh, I want to fix that binding corner. And I'm not exactly totally happy with that binding corner. All right, that's better. And again, I'm going to need this to come past the line of stitching. So I'm only going to press just the corner. I hope I didn't mess up the corner. Nope, nope, looks good. All right, so we've got 3 different samples for 3 different techniques. We are going to now go to the sewing machine. So come on over here to the sewing machine. So for these first 2 techniques, we put a lot of lights around the machine in hopes that you'd be able to see everything really well. We are going to use my open toe applique foot. So that's the one that has an opening. So here, let me put this other one up here. Whoops, if I don't drop it first. This is your normal foot, where it has, plastic or metal or something that runs along the front of it with that center line, which is what you do want to use when you're doing most of your stitching. But for this, I'm using the open toe applique foot. That means that I'm going to be able to see exactly where my needle is going. So let's get this guy out of the way and put this one on. And I have a white thread in the top and the bobbin. And I'm gonna there, all right? So I've lined my needle up to the middle. So I'm gonna first start with the pink one. On the pink one, this is the one that I've pressed using the steam-a-seam to the back because I'm going to stitch from the front. I'm gonna line my needle up so that I am stitching right next to the binding. And in order for me to do that and catch the back, I have to have that back be very stationary. So that's why when I'm doing this technique, I will do it by where I pre-stitch it down. Now I gotta tell you, this is not really my preferred method. I'm not a fan of the way that this turns out. So I'm gonna stitch this, and you can see that I am stitching right in that little valley there. So in the ditch, if you will. And I'm using, a white thread so that it's going to coordinate and, hide on this. Every once in a while, you see that I'm accidentally stitching on the binding. That is not what you want to do. You want to be right next to the binding. And I do want to get here, oops, there's a thread there, to this corner so I can turn it. Again, stitching right next to the binding. When it comes to the corner, lift your presser foot and turn. Whoops! Didn't mean to back up there. Okay. Hope that isn't too loud when I'm whoopsing on the camera. So do you see how the open toe applique foot makes it possible for you to really, really see where you're going? Now I'm going to cut off the thread, and I'm going to show you what the back of this looks like. So, well, here's the front. On the front, you can see my one little whoops there if you really got good eyes, but for the most part, you cannot see the line of stitching. Now I'm going to flip it over to the back. This is why I don't like this technique. No matter how careful I am, I end up with this lip. And I personally just don't like that lip. I don't like that it's not even from here to here. It bothers me. Might not bother you, in which case, try it this way. It also bothers me that I missed this little bit right here. Well, that's not a big deal. I'll just come back and I'll hand stitch that down. So for me, it's just not my preferred method. It works. And if this is how you want to do it, more power to you. So now I'm going to get the other quilt out and show you how I really like to do it. So on this quilt again, oh, here's the part that I pressed. All right. I put the binding on regular, I trimmed it right to the edge, and then I pressed it over. All right. So when I'm doing this, I like to stitch it. This is more my preferred technique. I put a thread in the bobbin that will hide or coordinate with this. So I have a white thread in the bobbin, and when I stitch it, there is going to be a line of stitching right here, and it's going to be white, and I'm okay with that. So what I like to do, and remember I did that blue line of stitching, so I know that I want my binding to come just past the blue line of stitching. I hold it like this and stitch it down right on the edge. So what I did not like with that other technique is that the binding, the back side of it, the line of stitching just sometimes is not where I want it to be. When I'm doing it this way, I'm lining it right there on the edge, so I know where the stitching is, and I want to try and get us to a corner here. And I'm using my seam ripper, I'll use my awl to kind of help keep my binding in position. One of the reasons we're having so many oops is that in order for Teresa to get this close to the machine, I am not so close to the machine, so I'm having to sit back a little bit. So please excuse my oopses. So now I'm coming to the corner, and I already pressed that, remember? Oops. Gotta grab it. There. One more stitch and I'll be on. Lift the presser foot, turn around, and then continue. Go a little farther and I'll show you my results. All right, so I love the back of it. I love that that line of stitching is so even from here. It's going to be pretty much as even as you personally can make it. And then look at it from the front side. Do you see it? Do you see it? Do you see it? No, you don't. It's right here. This is that line of stitching. And so it's just a little bit away from the binding, but it's in a coordinating or hiding thread color to the quilt top, so you don't really see it. So I don't mind the stitching on the quilt top. You might mind it, then don't do this one. That's okay. But I like the stitching on the back. I think that looks nice and neat. So all right, now Teresa's going to back up a little bit, and we're going to go to my other machine. All right, here, coming back, coming this way. So this time, I forgot the bike quilt. Okay, coming back this way. Okay, coming back to get the cool bike quilt. All right. So this time, I'm going to do the technique that I did on the corner of this one. So using that heavyweight thread. So I'm switching my machines. Not so much that I couldn't have done this on the other machine, but I switched the machine because I already have this one loaded. So first things first is you need to load up your bobbin with a thick thread. I have a collection. This is my collection of thick threads. Some of them are really hefty. This is one from YLI. I love this. Some really cool things you can do here. This is Madura's Glamour. I think that's Glamour or Glimmer. I have no idea whose these are. They're just so pretty I couldn't resist. These are actually from Krynic. So these are a hand stitching thread, and that is what we're going to use today. These are stitching threads that you use in needle arts, different needle art techniques. And then there's one of them here. Here it is. This is one that's generally pretty easy to find in quilt shops. This is from Superior. It's called Razzle Dazzle by Ricky Timms because he does a lot of bobbin quilting. Now, I did bobbin quilting a little while ago, so if you haven't found that one, go onto the YouTube channel and find the bobbin quilting. So for this one, we're going to do it here on this corner. I put in the bobbin that heavyweight blue thread, and in the top, I put kind of a coordinating blue thread. And we're going to do the same idea as we did on the last quilt. Now for this machine, I do not have an open toe applique foot. I'm just going to pay very, very close attention. I'm going to start here. And this is the part that I did not use the Steam-A-Seam 2 to hold down. This is the part that I did use the Steam-A-Seam 2 to hold on. So we'll kind of see which way we like it best. Come in to the edge. Oops, let me get that thread under there. There. And stitch up. There. And I'm going to bring my binding over the edge of where my stitching is. Watching real careful here, and you can see there's my line of stitching, so I'm being sure that my binding goes just past that. And you can feel it too. When you've done a few of these, you can feel it when it's over. When I first started doing these, I would accidentally fall off the ledge, so I would do a couple of things. I would use a smaller stitch length, and I would use my machine on a very slow setting. Now I use a regular stitch length, and I don't go fast by any means, but I don't go real slow either. All right, so this is the one that I've ironed down. I mean, yeah, with the Steam-A-Seam. You know what? I kind of like it. Look at that. It's all staying in a line. I think we'll know by the end results how we like it, but I think, all right, next time I do this, I will use the Steam-A-Seam and iron it all the way to the back. All right, I'm going to see how that corner looks. Oh, well, I did pretty good. Okay, so this is that line of the heavyweight metallic. I really like that. Now, I was happy with my, where it was pre-ironed down, but now I'm not because I realized that I wasn't being as precise. It was already down, so I just wasn't really being careful of enough, I think. So down here, it turned out pretty cool. So I'll probably take it out from here on down and redo that. But there you go. There are 3 techniques for stitching bindings down by machine. All right, Teresa, back up. I'm going to come this way. She's backing up as big as my studio will let her. So there you have it. Those are 3 techniques for stitching bindings down by machine. Give them a try. It can't hurt. Maybe try them on, like, you know, some crib quilts that you're going to donate. Because truthfully, the babies just are never going to know that you've done it. And if you perfect it, then you can find yourself doing that on some of the quilts that you make. And that'll get the quilts finished. And once they're finished, they can be gifted away. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, this is our first This is our first YouTube Live. I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have any questions, you can email me at quiltingwithnancy@gmail.com. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel is onpoint-tv, and we do have a Facebook channel, so if you're into Facebook, we just do some different things there. Our Facebook channel is onpoint-tv, and it's public. You don't need to have special permission to get in to see it. So have a great weekend and enjoy your quilting.